Hi, welcome back to my channel, Living, Laughing, and Loving a Family with Tourette's. First of all, I want to thank you for tuning in to the last post that I put up. I appreciate the support. I appreciate very much the subscribers. Sorry, that got a little tongue twister there. I thank you for liking my page, and if you think about it after you've watched the videos, if you could just hit the thumbs up, I'd really appreciate it very much. I'd like to take this time and address a comment that was left after the last show. It was from a person who was diagnosed recently with Tourette's, and they're age 15. Peachy, I want you to know that I completely understand where you are. I understand what's going on. I hear you when you say you feel alone and isolated. My children felt the same way. And you know, as a parent of children with Tourette's, I have felt isolated and alone too. Not very many people, when Matthew, my first son, was diagnosed, knew about Tourette's. And it was very difficult to find someone to talk to. But I want you to know that I'm here. You can leave any questions, any comments, anything that you feel you need to say that you can't say to anybody else. You can leave them on my page, and I would be happy to help you through this time. I understand that your parents are having trouble understanding your Tourette's and your tics, and that's a normal thing for families who are just coming into learning about Tourette's and the diagnosis being new. I would recommend that you get in touch with the Tourette's Association of America in New York, and they have free information that they would be happy to send you, and they also have the information right online at their website that you can print out, pamphlets that have questions and answers about Tourette's that will help your parents understand what it is that you're experiencing. I can speak from my own experience that as a parent, you don't really understand what the other person's feeling with the tics and with what it feels like to have to tic, but it will help them at least know what to look for. Like, one of the things that I was interested in was that in my observation of Matthew and Benjamin when they were first diagnosed is I had to watch them constantly, to watch for signs of irritability, sleep deprivation, appetite problems. When these things started happening, I finally clicked in my head that after a few months of this happening, this consistency of not sleeping well, being irritable, not eating well, they would start a new tic, and they would start the process of waxing and waning. And what happened would they would tic slowly at first, after a week of not sleeping and eating and being irritable, and then as the weeks progressed, the tics would become more consistent and more repetitive, until the point where they hit an apex where it was constant all the time. And then after a few days of that, they would go into the waning period where the tic would start to slow down, they would start to eat better, they would sleep better, and they were able to relax a little bit more until that tic disappeared. Now, during this whole process, when they were younger, before they hit adolescence, I understand that from what I observed, that a new tic could be at any part of their body. It could have been a vocal tic, eye tic, hand tic, leg tic, stomach tic, shoulders, any part of their body, the tic would come out. I just have to watch. And so hopefully, if you get this information from the Tourette's Association of America, it will help your family work together to make you feel better and help you understand yourself too. I know it's a scary road, and it can be lonely. So just please feel free to reach out. Today I'd like to talk about my oldest son, Matthew. Matthew is 33 years old, and he has he was diagnosed at the age of 2.5. But before he was diagnosed, Matthew was very, very ill. He ended up going to the hospital and staying there for 9 days. He was very, very dehydrated. It took us 2 hours to get an IV in him, and it was horrendous. It was the most traumatizing incident that I have ever had with one of my children at that young age. And he was had a fever on 105. He had a rash that would appear on certain parts of his body and then disappear and appear on other parts of his body. He was listless, he didn't eat, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. So finally, after 9 days, well, after 3 or 4 days, he started turning the corner and started getting better. And this happened to his father, his biological father, too, when he was a little boy. He was very, very sick, and he almost died. And after that traumatic experience was when the tics started. I read somewhere, and I can't say where because I can't remember, but I remember that reading in some Tourette's information that when a traumatic event like that happens, a very strong illness, and it affects them dramatically, it wakes up the Tourette's gene. And I can't say if that's true or not. I'm not a doctor, but before Matthew was sick, he was healthy, he ran everywhere, he ate everything that was good for you, and after he got out of the hospital, he put on weight, he lost his ability to run, his fine and gross motor skills became very delayed, and he was very tactile defensive. So, and then a year later, he started ticking. I watched him one day sitting in my mother's kitchen. He was in the living room kneeling down in front of a chair playing with his toys, and I watched him. He did 3 eye turns to the corner. He did 3 grins with his mouth, and then he brushed his nose like this, and then he sniffed back 3 times. And he kept doing this. And I looked at my mother and I said, "Mom, watch Matt for a second." And she watched him and she said, "What is he doing?" I said, "I have no idea." So what I did was I called the doctor, and he said to bring him in the next day, and he watched Matthew, and he saw Matthew doing the same repetitive movements with his head. And then he said, "I need to set him up with a neurologist in Portland." And I said, "Why?" And then he told me, he said, "I think he has Tourette syndrome." Now, when I was in high school, we had a young man in the chorus, and he had Tourette's. I remember this because our teacher, our choral director, told us to not make any comments, not to focus on him when he started ticking, but just to leave him alone. And I remember sitting in chorus one day watching him tick out of the corner of my eye. It's very hard not to look over when somebody's just moving, let alone ticking like he was. And he was holding on to the bottom of the chair, and he was ticking so violently that he lifted himself and the chair up off the floor 3 times. And that's when the teacher said, "Would you like to go to the office?" And he said yes. And that was my first encounter with Tourette's. So when Matthew was diagnosed, I was in shock. I didn't want to believe it. And it's really funny how God works, because before he got diagnosed, after he got out of the hospital, there used to be news magazine shows on TV at night, at 10 o'clock on Saturday nights, and I watched them. And there was 3 different ones. I can't remember the names of them. But one of them, all 3 of them, I mean, had shows about people with Tourette's. And that was before he was diagnosed, before I knew it was coming. And then when I watched him that day at my mother's house tick, like he did with his head, I had this really, really, really bad feeling in my gut. It was like a giant lead weight just fell on my stomach. And I became very anxious. And when the doctor told me the next day that he needed to go see a neurologist, this hot sweats went all over my body, and I couldn't focus, because I knew what Tourette's was, from not just from my friend, but from those shows. And I believe that those shows were on at the time that they were, because God was trying to prepare me for what was coming. And I believe that wholeheartedly. So so the year that after his diagnosis, I took a whole year. I lived in denial. I didn't want to face it. I didn't want to look at him as far as saying, oh, that's my child with Tourette's. I just said, that's my son Matthew, and he's just making movements. And I did not want to admit that he had Tourette's, because you know what? I knew what it was. From watching those shows, I knew how detrimental it was to a life, to the person who had it. And I loved my son so much. I still do, but at that time, he was my little baby, you know? He was my firstborn. I used to talk to him like he was a little old man. An ear, nose, throat doctor told me that for a 4-year-old, when he went to see him, he had an immense vocabulary. And it was just me and Matt. We were just, you know, two buds. And it just tore my heart out to see this happening to my son. So after that year of denial, funny, again, God put those shows on. It was different people, but it was still about Tourette's. And I watched them, and I was carrying my daughter, my third child, and I watched those shows, and I got crying. I was very upset, and I said, God, I don't want to accept this for my son. I said, how? How can you give an innocent little baby something so horrendous? But I had to come to a place where I could accept it as a parent, because in order for me to help my son deal with everything that Tourette's was going to bring into his life, I had to learn to accept it and deal with it. And so I prayed and I asked God to help me. I said, Lord, please, I can't do this by myself. It's breaking my heart. So would you please help me accept this? And at this time, I didn't have any idea about Benjamin possibly having it. It didn't even click in my head. But Matthew was diagnosed, and we learned to live with it. We learned to work it into our lives and work our lives around it. And it's very intrusive. Tourette's is very intrusive. It takes out many things that you're able to do as a family without Tourette's, and it encumbers it with tics and with OCD and ADHD and anxiety and hyperactivity, and it just takes a lot to just work your schedule and your life into it. It's not something that it's like an invasion. It comes in and invades your life, and then you have to take and reform your battlefronts and learn to adjust to it and live your life in a way that you weren't expecting to live it. So, thank you for bearing with my tears. It's still a very difficult situation sometimes for my heart and when I think about what they've dealt with, all my children. And I would like to bring Matt in and just introduce him to you and let you see him and let him say hi to you. And we're going to take a little trip down memory lane, and we're going to talk about some of the things that, just a few tics that he remembers. Matt? Hi, Matt.
Hi, Mom.
How you doing, honey?
I'm doing good.
You say hi to everybody for me?
Hi, everybody, for her.
Matthew, I want to, I'm not going to keep you very long. I just wanted to talk about a couple things that you might remember when you were younger, when you were first diagnosed. I don't want to, there's 33 years of your life that we have to talk about, but so we're going to break it into pieces, okay? So, do you remember the doctor in Portland who diagnosed you with Tourette's?
Very.
Dr. Allen, do you remember him?
Very barely. The only thing I recognized him from is that the white hair, and he almost had, his face was almost like built by Jim Henson. He looked kind of like a Muppet.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah,
you were very young.
Time, so.
You were very young, but he was, Matthew was a very happy child, even in spite of the Tourette's, and he loved to tell everybody about Jesus and how much Jesus loved everybody. And I remember one day the doctor was having he was a very gruff doctor, but he was a good doctor. And he was having a hard day, and Matthew walked over to him. And do you remember this, Matt? You walked over to him. What did you say to him? You asked him a question.
Oh yeah, I asked him if he loved Jesus.
You asked him if he loved God, and then you
Mhm.
said he didn't say anything because he was kind of taken off guard. And then you looked at him and you said, because he loves you. And after that visit, the doctor was completely different. He'd come out to the waiting room and take Matt's hand, and we'd go back together, and he'd smile and he laughed with Matthew and joked with him, and it was a completely different atmosphere after that. And I want to talk about one of the very determined tick. Let's put it that way. You were just 3.5 years old, almost 4, and you had a head tick. Can you remember what that was?
Yeah, I had
Can you demonstrate it for everybody?
it is hard, but really hard. I turned my head like that, and well, it hurt. It was like headaches.
And at first, when you were little, it was just once in a while when it started, right?
Yeah.
And then, in a matter of a couple weeks, what happened?
Oh, it got worse.
And what do you mean by worse? Was it constant all the time?
Yeah, more constant. I mean, I remember probably hitting my head on the wall or something.
Yeah, you did. And it was very hard for you to watch cartoons, wasn't it? And to play video games. Because you couldn't stop going like this. It was non-stop. You couldn't even look at me. So one night, I come in to tuck you and Benjamin in, and you got crying. And can you remember what you asked me to do?
Praying that God would stop that.
Yeah, you did. You got crying, and I got crying, and you said, Mom, I'm so tired. Would you please pray that Jesus would stop this tick? And we prayed. And can you remember what happened the next morning?
It was gone.
It was gone. It was gone. You come into my room, and you were all smiles, and you said, Mama, Jesus took my tick away. Do you remember that?
I do. I remember it, but I can't always see every little bit of it.
Yeah.
You know, and part of that's because of the liver in my head.
Yeah, just a quick note here. Matthew has encephalopathy tendencies because he has cirrhosis. It was not something that we expected. He was diagnosed 2 years ago, and it's called NASH cirrhosis. It comes from a fatty liver disease and diabetes, type 2 diabetes, which he has. So Matthew, I want to thank you for joining me today, and we'll chat again. Maybe you can think of some things that you'd like to talk about, some feelings, and I just want to ask you one more thing before you go. Do you remember one time you told me what it was like when a tick was building up inside in your body? Can you explain that to me?
I can remember talking about that. I can't remember everything I said, but
Well, can you express it right
when
now?
When something's building up and it's about to, it's like everything's fine, and then this giant bunker buster just falls on.
But what does it feel like in your body where you're ticking? Say it's a hand tick. What does it feel like? Because you've been doing a lot of those lately.
Well, it can be pretty annoying.
But does the muscle feel like something's building up inside it, like it's burning, like overuse? Like, you know how sometimes when you would, not exercise for a while, and then you'd walk and you get tired and burning in your muscles?
Yeah.
Does it feel like that before you tick?
No, not this time. Not with these.
Well, what does that feel like then?
Well, this one just happens. Sometimes I don't even notice.
Really?
Yeah. Just
Yeah.
And like I said though, it's like you have a bunker that holds these different ticks, and a big bomb just.
And then the ticks just start. Okay.
All right. Well, before I go, I want to say I love you.
I love you too, sweetheart.
And to all you that watch this, I want to say, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up His countenance upon you and bring you His shalom, His peace. Especially to Peachy. You're not alone.
Amen. You're not alone. Thank you, Matthew, for joining us today. I want to thank you for tuning in today. As you can see, there are times, even now, after 33 years of dealing with Tourette's and working with it and watching it and seeing how it has played in my children's lives, it still makes me cry. It makes me tear up because I love my family. We are a family that loves God very much, and without God we would not be where we are today, as close as we are. One last thing. Happy belated Thanksgiving. We had a good day yesterday, and even though my Cornish game hens were not done all the way, we had to stop and just eat our vegetables, we have this tradition in our family that we started over 20 years ago, that on Thanksgiving Day, after all the dishes are done and all the food is put away, we each take a piece of the certain pie that we want, like apple. I made apple, pumpkin, chocolate cream, banana cream, and peanut butter pie with an Oreo cookie crust, which is really good. And we all got our pieces of pie, and we go in and we sit down, and to usher in the Christmas season, we watch Muppet Christmas Carol. It's been a tradition in our family for over 20 years, and I have to say that yesterday's experience was just so full of love and just so full of joy, because my son Caleb, who had DBS surgery in the beginning of this year, deep brain stimulation surgery for his tics, was able to join us for Thanksgiving dinner and to watch the Muppet Christmas Carol, and it just filled my heart with so much love and so much joy because we were all together. So I hope that you have a very, very Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and I will see you again next week. Thank you.